Dr. Elisa Song, I wish that I had your book, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, when my daughter was younger. She's 13 now, but nonetheless, it's still better late than never. And I love what it's saying here too, why your child's microbiome holds the key to lifelong wellness. And it's something I've always been curious about, Lisa, but I've never quite found the right resource to make it accessible, right? And your book is so well written. It's easy, it's pick upable. It's kind of like your go-to, almost like your Bible for wellness. You can pick it up and
Yeah.
you can read through the whole thing, but then you can just come back to it. So just to get started, you've come from an integrative pediatrician's point of view. I'd love for you to share with our audience what the difference is between the integrative pediatrician and this world of functional medicine and conventional. Just sort of help us understand what is the distinction between those three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So conventional pediatrics is what most of us as parents are familiar with in the moment. This is, I mean, I went through a very conventional medical school at NYU, and my residency training was at UCSF. So it was very, standard, conventional, what you need to know to get licensed as a pediatrician. And you need that. There is a time and a place where you need some of the really more intense medical interventions, or you need antibiotics or other medications. However, being in residency and seeing, more and more kids just being diagnosed with chronic illness, and stepping out into my own practice and being flooded with parents who were not finding the answers for their kids
Mm.
solely with the conventional approach. I started looking, and I started looking into what else could we offer. And so I dove into functional medicine, which is really a way of getting to the root cause or causes. There's usually not just one cause, but the root causes, the underlying clinical imbalances that are coming together to manifest in your child as whatever state of health they're in, whether it's a state of optimal health, or maybe something's not quite right. Maybe they have a little eczema or attention and focus issues or anxiety. And then there are so many other ways that we can support kids. And so I started looking into other ways too, because diet and lifestyle and supplements can be an amazing adjunct to conventional medicine, but there's so many other things too. So and this varies for everybody, but I dove into traditional Chinese medicine, and I do acupuncture and herbal medicine. I teach parents how to do acupressure. I love homeopathy. That really drew me because it's such a safe medicine for infants and children and even nursing moms. And so I dove into that. And then essential oils, essential oils, when the craze kind of took over, I thought, well, let me see what this is all about. Let me see, is this actually something that could benefit kids? Maybe are there any potential concerns that we should have? And what's the science behind it? How do we incorporate that? So with all of that, I call myself an integrative pediatrician. So it's really integrating and trying to personalize the approach for your child based on whatever modalities you have at your disposal. And so for me, that is what I do. There are so many other modalities as well, forms of medicine that can be very helpful. There's Ayurvedic, and there's
Yeah.
Reiki and so much more. I do a lot of mind body medicine in my practice, and I don't necessarily call it mind body medicine because I really want to make sure that kids and parents understand this is one of the most important things that we can do to help your child thrive and succeed. So I call it vagus nerve work, just to really
Mm.
help kids understand and parents understand there is a physiologic basis to what people call mind body medicine, and often get the eye roll and, oh, I'll do that later. So
Yes.
that is, that's what I would consider integrative. It's not throwing, the conventional baby out with the bathwater. You're saying, okay, there's a time and a place for conventional medicine, but recognizing that conventional pediatrics doesn't do a whole lot to prevent kids from getting chronic illness,
Right.
and doesn't necessarily look at what's optimal for kids.
Mm.
And so, we want our kids to thrive. I mean, my son is 13, so we have a teen right around the same age, and
Mhm.
my daughter is 15. And so, you bet I want to make sure that that their future looks bright, and
Mhm.
it's never too late. I feel like, especially for our tweens and teens, it is so important. And you mentioned my book. I actually looked on Amazon and was really surprised to find that it's climbing up on the list of teen and young adult books, which is
Uh,
amazing. I mean, I actually
yes,
have
right.
college kids who are reading it and finding
Yeah.
pearls to help them understand what choices they want to make as young adults, which, I mean, that as parents, that's our job, right? To
Yeah.
prepare kids to be successful, independent adults.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I have so much to say. One of the things I think about when you talk about integrative pediatrician, I think about that because I come from an education background. We always talk about holistic, right? So
Mhm.
always looking at the whole child. And so you're looking at the same lens for us, we're always looking at, okay, here's the basic as a teacher, here's the curriculum, but how do we adapt it? How do we learn about the child? How do we find out what's under the surface? So you're
Yep.
taking that, so a partnership between an educator who has all the different modalities as well and different learning. And I love that you're a lifelong learner too. And that sense of curiosity has only just built your capacity to be able to help children at such a wider level, right? To even, and I love the way that you've approached it. The fact that you're talking about little ones all the way now, you're talking about teens
Yeah.
in such an accessible way. And this isn't rocket science, Elisa.
Mhm.
Like, I think about I grew up in the middle of Canada to a British mom, lived on a farm, everything was homemade. My mom was always a big nutritionist just by the nature of who she was. It wasn't she didn't have the training, but I came from a very holistic background, wholesome background for
Yes.
eating. But it sort of feels like it's hard these days to keep up with that. It feels like you're swimming upriver. And I love the way you talk about the gut hero detective, label detectives, right? Anyway, we'll get into that. But I want to sweep back to your vagus nerve because that's obviously near and dear
Yes.
to our heart here at Kids Yoga Stories. Tell us a little bit about, this how we optimizing for this vagus nerve in terms of their microbiomes because we talk a lot about here, how to help them, their mental health and how to be calm and reduce their anxiety and stress. But you're talking from the perspective of their microbiomes and the connecting to their gut and their brain. Amazing. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and and I love that I love coming at this from the perspective of educating and empowering and also making it fun. I mean, we want to make it very
Yes.
accessible to kids and teenagers, and we want them to know that this is really that they can own this. It's not just mom and dad saying, "Oh, you should do this," right?
Yes,
And
right.
as I go through and I think about, what are the skills, the life skills that kids really need to become successful independently, whatever after high school looks like, whether it's going straight to a job or whether it's going to, a college and further education. And I let parents know that, the two most important skills that I believe that kids need to have in order to succeed. You mentioned one of them is learning how to read food labels like a gut hero,
Mhm.
and number two is learning how to regulate their nervous system. I think if they
Yes.
have both of these under their belt, they understand. Of course, there are going to be times where they go off course, just as we do as adults, but they know how to course
Mm.
correct. They're going to be set up in a way that can help us as parents feel more confident letting go, when they're older.
Mm.
And so, when I talk about the vagus nerve and the gut brain connection, I do it from the perspective of how do I make this really tangible for kids and parents? And how do I make it seem real? Because when we talk
Mm.
about mind body medicine, there is this kind of, oh, well, that's not connected to my body. That's sort of,
Mm.
how I feel. But we need to understand that how we feel affects how our brain's working, how our immune system works, how much inflammation we have, how our gut microbiome is functioning, and vice versa. How our gut microbiome is functioning actually can inform how we think and feel and behave. It's very intimately connected. And so when we talk about the gut microbiome, what I mean, most people by now, even kids, many kids have heard of probiotics and they know, oh, okay, those are sort of the good bugs that you find in yogurt, or maybe some kids have had kombucha. And then just opening up that door to let them know that there are hundreds of trillions of these microorganisms in your gut that make up something called your microbiome. And this it's an ecosystem, just like our kids learn at a very early age to take care of the ecosystem around us by reducing, reusing, recycling, repurposing, all the R's. And kids, even in preschool, learn if we have to take care of the ecosystem around us, if the ecosystem is going to take care of
Mm.
us. And in the same way, this internal ecosystem, their job, all of those microorganisms, if they are beneficial, the right ones, their job is to take care of us and our brains
Mm.
and our immune systems. So we need to take care of them in order for them to take care of us. And then when it comes specifically to the gut brain connection, when we take care of our microbes and the right friendly microbes, those probiotics are in our gut, and not a lot of the unfriendly ones that we don't want, those microbes actually make, quote, brain chemicals for us, or neurotransmitters. In fact, our microbes are responsible for up to 80 to 90% of all the serotonin in our body. And
Mm.
serotonin is our feel good, relax, stay calm, manage stress, get better sleep neurotransmitter, and also about 50% of our dopamine, which is the
Mm.
neurotransmitter that's involved in focus and attention and staying motivated and interested. And our gut microbiome actually makes over 400 times the melatonin than our brain does. And so, when we're looking at our child and noticing that they're getting anxious or they're getting
Mm.
really fidgety and can't sit still in their seats and aren't comfortable in their bodies, or as teenagers, they're the 1 in 3 teenage girls who are suffering from severe anxiety and depression, maybe even thinking of harming themselves. Of course, we're going to focus on, what sorts of, cognitive behavioral therapy, what tools can we give them? But we also absolutely need to think what's going on in their gut, because if they
Mm.
don't have enough serotonin to manage stress, or they don't have enough dopamine to pay attention and stay focused, everything we do is maybe helpful, but it's going to be a much steeper uphill battle than if we
Mm.
can correct and their gut brain connection and their microbiome. And part of that is working on their vagus nerve, which is that long wandering nerve that connects from your brain, goes down behind your ear, down the side of your neck, and connects your brain to every organ system in your body, but most importantly, your gut microbiome. And what's fascinating is that the majority of that communication, it's like this two-way information highway. 80% of that communication occurs from your gut to your brain. Now, we want to know how to nourish our microbiome,
Mm.
but we also have to remember that nourishing your vagus nerve is one of the best ways also to optimize your gut microbiome. In fact, when we nourish and optimize and do our vagus nerve work, that can improve your child's microbiome and ours too as parents, independent of diet. So it doesn't
Mm.
matter. I'm not saying that you can go out and eat, all the junk that you want to, but if that's an area, food is a challenging area for you at the moment,
Mm.
then work on the vagus nerve, because there are simple, free ways that we can engage our vagus nerve every day. And I love that you said in the beginning that, all of this is not rocket science. And it's not. A lot of these things are very simple to think about implementing. But sometimes the simplest things, even though they make the most profound difference, they're not the easiest things to do, because they are
Right.
things that we have to do ourselves. It's not just here, take this medication or take this supplement. It's,
Mm.
we have to do that work.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And talked a little bit about, you know, I love the way you were going through what we shouldn't do. So yes, let's talk about the success things, but can you elaborate more on what are those significant factors that you're talking about that are disrupting our microbiomes?
Okay, there are many, many factors that disrupt our microbiome, just living in our modern world. And
Mhm.
um, Psychological stress is one of the most insidious ones. I mean, and I'm not talking all stress because what I also really, hopefully imparted in the book to parents and kids is that the term stress and the outcome, the activity of being stressed is actually not always a bad thing. A lot of people think, oh, I'm stressed, and that's a horrible thing. I don't ever want my child to be stressed. And in fact, that shouldn't be our goal. The goal as parents and as kids should be to have stress that is manageable. Because every time we have a stressor, whether it's a physical or infectious or psychological stress, and we overcome that, our body and our brain and our immune system actually gets stronger for the next time we
Mm,
have a stress. And there's a sweet spot of just the right amount of stress that keeps us
right.
motivated. That we've all had this experience of being in the zone when we have a deadline, or we feel like, oh my gosh, I'm on fire, I'm getting all these things done, right? We would never do that if we didn't have a deadline, or if we didn't have a soccer tournament, and you bet we have to get laser focused for that. So there's that good stress. It's just that nowadays we have a lot of that coming towards us, and it can be hard to manage, and we don't necessarily have the tools, which is where, with kids yoga stories and other vagus nerve work, there
Mhm.
we do have the tools. We just need to teach them. Now, there
Mhm.
are, though, the other factors that are very common for our children. Number one are medications. I mean, a lot of the medications that we're giving to our children, and sometimes very necessary, although sometimes not. So that's where, trying to figure out when it is necessary or isn't can be challenging. But the number one, most significant immediate disruptor to our microbiome are antibiotics. And in some studies, up to 70% of antibiotics prescribed for children were inappropriately prescribed, because most of the time kids have viral infections, and antibiotics don't do anything
Mm,
for viruses. But what they can do is significantly disrupt the microbiome, because antibiotics are not choosy. I mean, ideally, they would kill only the bad bacteria that are causing whatever problems your child might have. But they also kill good bacteria, our probiotics. And so, if we don't know how to restore the gut microbiome during and after antibiotics, you can have this ongoing disruption that then can
mm,
increase the risk for immune problems or mental health problems. We know in adults, just one round of antibiotics can significantly increase the risk of subsequently developing depression or anxiety. And we know this in kids too. In kids,
mhm.
there are some really large studies looking at infants receiving antibiotics within the first 6 months of life. Now, I would say if a baby's receiving antibiotics, it probably is necessary. I mean, we don't want to mess with infections when you're a baby. However, we don't want to trade short-term benefits for longer-term problems. So this one study of nearly 800,000 children found that infants who received antibiotics or antacid medications in the first 6 months of life had a significantly increased risk of developing pretty much every allergic disease by the time they were
Oh,
four
wow.
years of age. So, including eczema, which is on the rise, asthma, hay fever, anaphylactic food allergies. When it comes to the gut brain connection, there is a study of, I think, nearly 1 million children. I can't remember if it was a Danish or a Finnish study, but looked at children who would receive antibiotics. And there was a significantly increased risk of mental health concerns when those kids were older or teenagers. That risk was greatest when those antibiotics received under 6 months of age. So again,
Mm,
not to say don't give those antibiotics, but know how to support your child's microbiome during that time. And I know some parents are listening thinking, oh my gosh, my child did receive antibiotics, and now they're 7, or now they're 14, and they're dealing with eczema, or they're dealing with ADHD or anxiety. That we can't go back and change what's happened in time. So, it's just to sit there and know that. I know as moms, we can't help but feel guilty. I mean, both my kids had antibiotics when they were under 2 months of age. Um, but we now, right? Now this is an
yes.
opportunity to say, okay, now I understand a part of the story of how my child got to where they are today.
Mhm.
And now I know to look at their microbiome. Even if their poops are healthy looking and they don't have tummy aches and they don't have any quote gut symptoms, now I understand that their immune system issue or their brain or mental health issue, it is also a gut issue, and now we need to look there.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you talked about antibiotics and stress. What are some of the other ones that
Yeah.
you talk about in the book?
So I would say the next thing that is really our kids are really impacted by are ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
So, all of the there's just way too much added sugars and salts and fats in these ultra processed foods by design. I mean, to make us addicted
Mhm.
to them, to make our taste buds in our brain feel like we want sweeter and sweeter and saltier and all the things. Now, sugar is I talk about microbiome mischief makers, what kids can look
Mhm.
at on the label to be really savvy food label readers, because it's not the reality for most kids and families that they're never going to eat out of something out of a package. Right. I mean, I give the example of we don't make our own spaghetti sauce. Yes, it would be fairly simple to do, but sometimes we get home and we are really hungry and we just want a jar of pasta sauce already made. But
Mhm.
there's a
Yeah.
whole selection of pasta sauces, and you can get some that have a lot of added sugar, a lot of, artificial ingredients, and you can get some that are very simple. I mean, what should pasta sauce have?
Mhm.
It should have tomatoes, some olive oil, and some seasonings. I mean, that's about it. There's no need for added sugars, in naturally sweet tomatoes. And so, teaching kids how to, first of all, the number one microbiome mischief maker is added sugars, how to manage their added sugar load every day. Because kids should have no more than about 25 grams or 6 teaspoons of added sugar in a day. And 6 teaspoons, when you think about it, sounds like, oh, okay, well, that's doable. I mean, 6 teaspoons is kind of, that's, seems like a fairly good amount of sugar. Well, the average teenager today has nearly 34 teaspoons of added sugar in a day because they're hiding in almost every packaged food you can imagine.
Mhm.
And, some of the protein bars that they think are so healthy, or these, um, protein drinks or whatever it is that you're not even aware of, salad dressings, even baby food, you look and you're like, wow, there's nearly 3 teaspoons of added sugar in this. Or worse yet, the boba teas or the Starbucks, frozen drinks. I mean, they have nearly 15 teaspoons of added sugar. So just being aware and savvy, and not saying never ever to those sugary things, but recognizing, okay, that's pretty much taken all of the sugar out of my sugar bank for the day. Let's,
Yeah.
be mindful and really nourish our microbiome for the rest of the day and even the following day. And then we have all of these, food additives that are approved by the FDA. There's nearly, I think, 3,000 food additives on the FDA's list, literally called everything added to foods list.
Mhm.
And they're approved for use by food manufacturers. Now, some of these are things like vitamins, like you can add, vitamin B12 or folate or things like that. But many of them are ingredients that are chemically designed to, again, make the food more addictive or make it look more attractive, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
these artificial colors and these emulsifiers that keep food together from becoming goopy messes in the package, those, have been found to affect brain functioning in kids, memory, mood, even on the other end of our age spectrum, with cognitive decline and dementia. Ultra processed foods can play a significant role. And
Yeah.
then these emulsifiers can also directly impact the gut microbiome. So it's really, it sounds overwhelming when we're just talking about it, but when you break it down into, okay, let's look at the nutrition facts label, let's look at the servings, and let's look at the added sugars, and then pop down to the ingredients and notice, what do you recognize, what do you not recognize and need to look up, and, what are the ingredients that over time you'll just be able to quickly glance and know, okay, anything with a number is probably an artificial color that I want to put back, right?
Yeah.
Anything that says mono and diglycerides, you don't have to memorize mono. What is that? But if you just see that mono, okay, probably I want to put that back, right? So over time, you get to be very quick at just looking at the label and putting it back. And every time I go to the grocery store and don't look at all the labels and put something in my shopping cart, I come home and I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I buy this? Right. And so just
Yes.
taking that moment in the grocery store is so worthwhile, and teaching your kids how to do that so that they can make choices that you're happy with as a parent, but also they understand what the swaps are that are going to keep them happy, because we want them to also feel like they can go to the store or go out to lunch with their friends as they get older and buy something to drink and eat, and not just have to sit there.
Yes. Yes. And for the listeners, everyone must get a copy of your book because everything you've said there is laid out so you could use it as a reference. Because as you say, there's a lot of information you're providing here, but you can come back to that. So one of the things that I love about your book too is that I've been a nag, right, with my daughter about sugar. That's it's one of my things. And as you say in the book, the 3,000 additives, the 6 codes of sugar, and you say here in the United States is definitely different. So I'm from Canada. My husband's Australian. My parents are British. So in the other countries, we have stricter regulations on the
Yes.
types of food. So unfortunately, here in America, we don't have those same regulations. So I'm always nagging my daughter about the level of sugar, and it's when you talk about the story of how you put that course together, and we can talk about that after,
Yeah.
for the third graders, I was so inspired. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wish my daughter was in that course. Because when you hear it from your mom, it sounds like a nag, right? And
Yes.
so she's become such a strong sugar addict, Elisa, that everywhere, no matter if I don't have it in the house, she finds it everywhere. And now she's
Mm,
of the age that she was door dashing Dairy Queen the other day.
yes. Oh
And
my
I said to
God.
her, what did you get? And then we looked at, we quickly looked at the ingredients. And as you say, it was like eight, I think it was like 30 something grams of sugar in a
Yeah.
little Dairy Queen, right? And
Yeah.
so it's so frustrating to me because she was diagnosed with autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression a few years ago. So I know that her
Yeah.
behaviors are linked to sugar, and it makes me so upset. And it's how from your experience working with maybe some more challenging neurodiverse clients that you've been working with,
Yeah.
have you found any tips to be able to have them, take ownership? Because the
Yes.
more I
Yeah.
talk about it, the more she runs for the hills and does the polar opposite.
Yeah.
This has been
Yeah.
going on for a long time. Like she's been, even though I had her in San Francisco, where you are from, you're in now, but I was like that typical San Francisco mom, like you see those documentaries of moms around the world. I was yoga,
Yep.
everything was
Yep.
homemade. Everything before when I got pregnant, everything was natural. And so she didn't have any sugar until, she's in elementary school, really. So she
Yeah.
came from a strong gut biome, but oh my goodness, it's just like floodgates open now. So do you have any advice to help those sort of neurodiverse, stubborn kiddos?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I would say, I would absolutely want to take a look inside her microbiome, right? Because sugar cravings typically stem from, there's lots of places where it stem. There's the emotional piece, and then, sugar is just very addictive. But oftentimes when we're craving sugar, it's because there's something in our microbiome is telling your brain to eat more sugar. And
Mhm.
usually that something is an overgrowth of yeast. Now, I'm not going to say many people. I don't know how many people have actually baked their own bread, but it's a super fun thing to do, or made homemade pretzels. But when you use yeast, right? What has to happen to activate the yeast? Put in some warm water. You have to add sugar, right?
Mm.
Because that yeast needs sugar to grow and thrive. Same thing, we just brewed, we're making kombucha. When you mentioned the
Oh,
the
I
class,
love
I
it.
taught my daughter's third and fourth grade class. My son, who's younger, he always misses out as a younger child, and he asked, he's in eighth grade, can you please do the same class for
Oh, I
for the middle
love that.
schoolers?
I
So
love
we're
it.
just tomorrow on our last day of 6 sessions, and it's a
Oh my
it's a different
goodness.
way. But these sixth to eighth graders, they're so into it. I love it. So we brewed
Yes.
kombucha, and I told them, okay, why do you put sugar in the first brew and then in the second brew? Because the yeast need it, right?
Mm.
The yeast will You will not have a kombucha without sugar. So, and it looks like a lot of sugar when you first put it in, but the yeast are eating it up. So, when you have a lot of yeast in your microbiome,
Mm,
that yeast will start sending signals to your brain, to feed me, right?
yeah.
And then your brain takes that and says, "Oh, I want sugar." It's not you that really wants the sugar, it's a yeast in your microbiome. So, a lot of kids and adults who have sugar cravings, once we can clear the yeast out, sure, they still like sugar and they might still really want it sometimes, but the cravings aren't as intense. So, that's one thing
Mm,
physiologically that can be very helpful. In fact, there are studies looking at not just yeast, but other microbes in your gut that can dictate your food preferences. So interesting, right?
right.
Um, and um, and so that's one thing. The second thing is, just for kids, I mean, kids in general, but especially our neurodiverse kids, we know that their brain is maturing at a different rate, right? And for our kids with ADHD, their brains may not be fully kind of adult mature, like with all the neural patternings for this front of their brain, which is the prefrontal cortex rational decision making part of the brain, until in their late 20s, right? And
Hmm.
so recognizing that and then just educating in a very neutral way, right? Because as you said, the more we get invested emotionally as parents, the more kids feel that and in turn decide that, I mean, on a subconscious level, but like they as especially as teenagers want their own ownership, so that must mean something different than mom, right? And
Yes.
so trying to stay neutral. Now, educating about what is most important to them. So there's usually something that kids are really there's that motivates them more. For a lot of teenagers, it's their skin or their hair. So explaining the gut microbiome skin connection and how sugar
Mm,
really, feeds the wrong bacteria, not just in your gut, but also on your skin, and is a big culprit for acne, can be one. For some kids, it's athleticism. I have some kids who really, they want to be super fast or when they're running down the soccer field or, be more accurate with their tennis or whatever it is, gymnastics. Well, I also talk to kids about their muscles and how, of course, we want your muscles to be really strong. And how do we do that? What foods you need? Of course, you need the protein. You also need a lot of color, in the fruits and vegetables to repair your muscles after you work out. And then when we get to sugar, I let them know that sugar actually is a meat tenderizer, right? What does that mean? Right? Is there sugar and of course salt in different rubs or barbecue sauces? Because it makes muscles really soft, right? Like when you eat a steak, I mean, that's muscle, right? So it makes it really soft. So when you pour in, a half a cup's worth of sugar into your body, that is going to really undo a lot of the work you're doing to make your muscles strong. It's going to keep your
mm,
muscles more soft. So sometimes for that, like that seems to be the one right at the moment that my kids are really leaning into because they're really
right.
into soccer,
Yeah.
So trying to figure out what if it's sleep or maybe it's their mood or maybe it's you know um not liking how impulsive they are. So many things we can tie back to the microbiome
Yes.
and frankly to the sugar because as you said, I mean the amount of added sugars for our kids
Mm,
is really driving so much of their behaviors and their anxiety and their ability to deal with stress.
yeah. I love what you say in the book. Don't you say smart? If you want to be smarter, you want to, what is it? That you've got a three, if you want to be smarter, work harder. There's three of them that you say in the book. Do you remember that? The
I
three? No.
don't.
No.
Like, what
Okay.
did I
There's
say?
three that you say that that really ties up that and like it affects your how you go to athletics, how you're good at your academics as well as your mood, right?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, right. So going back to that the discussion there about sugar and yeast, how do you get rid of yeast in
Mm.
children in their
Yeah.
bellies?
So, some oftentimes, especially when kids are struggling with anything, whether it's their, eczema or whether it's a little or a lot anxiety. I do like to do a microbiome test, a specialized microbiome test, just to see, because we can now know fascinating things about what's going on. We can detect, are there, enough species in your microbiome that produce GABA, which is a really
Mm.
important calming neurotransmitter? Do you have too many species that are producing histamine? Because histamine can also cause problems for, not just people with allergies, but it also can act on the brain and cause confusion or irritability. So that would be ideal. If you don't have access to that, then one of the things that I talk about in the book is using MCT oil to help cleanse out the yeast. Now, MCT oil is
All
basically
right.
derived from coconut oil. You could also take a spoonful of coconut oil, but the MCT is kind of purified out. MCT is actually also found in breast milk. It's a natural component of breast
Mm.
milk that helps to support the growth of beneficial bacteria in your baby's microbiome and keep out the not such good bacteria. And so, simply taking, depending on how big your kid is, a half a teaspoon or a teaspoon a day, while taking a really, good multi-strain probiotic can be very helpful. And we also want to make sure that, even, probiotics alone, the supplements alone, they're not going to stick unless your microbiome's environment, the ecosystem is healthy, right? In the book, I say, well, it's not, you can't just think it's like Jack's Magic Beans and just throw those probiotics down into your gut
Mhm.
and boom, all of a sudden we have this flourishing garden of probiotics. It doesn't work that way. They need food just like we do. And so as much as possible, keeping out those microbiome mischief makers and
Mm.
nourishing your microbiome with fiber from plants, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, um, phytonutrients, all the different colors found in our food support healthy microbiomes and unique different species. So spices count too, herbs and spices, cinnamon, cilantro, parsley, turmeric, anything you like to kind of flavor up your food with, all of that really helps. In fact, I
Mm.
just read this study last week. I was fascinated by it. In Indian culture, this yummy curries are made with so many different seasonings and spices that, are roasted to bloom and bring out the flavor. And this one study looked at an Indian curry blend that had five different herbs, different Ayurvedic herbs. And after just one meal, that
Mm.
significantly changed their microbiome for the better, just after
No
one meal,
kidding. That's
right?
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
so,
amazing.
so getting in thinking, when we're thinking about the rainbow, I mean, imagine that differently than just fruits and vegetables. It's
Mm.
we want to include a white or a tan section that includes our legumes, nuts and seeds, whole grains, and then we also want to include all of those spices that add, color and richness and those phytonutrients, those plant nutrients that
Mm.
serve us. And then, of course, fermented foods. Now, fermented foods, um, there was one study that looked at young women with social anxiety and found that fermented foods significantly improved their social anxiety.
Mm.
And the researchers note, and sometimes I have to kind of chuckle a little bit at their conclusions because yes, we want everyone to know that fermented foods could be a low cost intervention for young
Right.
adults with social anxiety. Of course, I mean, why aren't more people talking about food as medicine for social anxieties? Um, and so. But a lot of people when they think about fermented foods, they think about sauerkraut and think, well, I don't know, my kid's not going to eat sauerkraut. So, I mean, we want to think outside the sauerkraut box. And in the book, I have a fermented blackberry lemonade that we actually made in my daughter's class and my son's class, and they loved. The first time we made it with whey from yogurt that we strained out. The second time we did a little cheat and not cheat, but like an easier way, and we just added a probiotic capsule into it.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah.
And there's kombucha, which I mean, if you've never made kombucha, it is one of the most fun things to do. And it's really not difficult. And so, I highly encourage everybody. It's one of the most fun projects you can do with your kids. Um, and we talk to our SCOBY and I mean, we take care of our SCOBY. I mean, now our SCOBY has many babies. And
Yeah.
but thinking like when you make a fermented fruit blend, right? A lot of people don't think of making fermented fruits, but make a fermented fruit blend. use that over your pancakes. Put it into a smoothie,
Mm.
make it into a popsicle as we head into the summer. Lots of different ways we can get fermented foods in, and fermented foods are, so good at keeping your microbiome in a balanced state.
Yeah, I love it. I love the three F's, and you go into that again in the book. So again, it was fiber, having fibers in your plentiful, the veggies and the phytonutrients and the fermented foods. So
Yep.
those three F's are really important. So we've spoken about checking your gut. Is there a simple way to, because your PCP won't necessarily do that checking. You have to find a
It's
functional medicine practitioner,
Yeah,
right?
yes and no. I mean, now, so I'm actually, I mean, just full disclosure, I'm chief medical officer of Tiny Health, which is a microbiome testing company. Which, it took a while for me to get on board with their testing. It's a different way of testing than even a lot of functional medicine practitioners are currently really familiar with and aware of. But now their method of testing, which is called shotgun metagenomics, it is the gold standard now of microbiome testing. And more companies are actually moving towards shotgun metagenomics, and this is for children and for adults. Now, for children, it's especially important to use Tiny Health because they're the only ones that have microbiome specific ranges for different ages. Because little kids' microbiomes and even teenage microbiomes don't look like adult microbiomes. And
Mm.
so, as we recognize that, we don't want to use adult standards to then decide our plan of action for our kids.
Yes,
Um,
right.
so, so Tiny Health actually has it's a baseline gut health test for consumers. It's the first
No
one that's
kidding.
really now available direct to consumer,
Huh.
which is awesome. They have a slightly more involved test for practitioners to order, but the baseline test is so good. It has, I mean, pretty much all the markers that you'd need.
Mm.
And then, if you're really having particular issues or lots of GI issues, then I might, look for a practitioner and do the pro test. But when you order the Tiny Health test, and as a mom, as a consumer, their platform uses AI that is out of this world. I mean, you click in, you can
Mm.
see, oh, my child doesn't have enough bifidobacteria, a beneficial probiotic. Then you can click in, and there are all these suggestions with what foods support
No kidding.
bifidobacteria, different ideas for supplements, and even if you'd like specific brands that include those supplements. I mean, it's phenomenal. And so
Wow.
that is something that is, it is one of the most cost-effective, best things that you can do, I think, for your kids to really get a look, under the hood at their microbiome.
Yeah, I love it. And is there a genetic? I don't even know about that. Like if my testing, because I think I was listening to you said also sometimes moms who are low vitamin D or something at birth. So at birth, she would take on our microbiome, right? So mine might be similar to
It
hers.
could be. Now,
Could be.
diet really impacts microbiome quite a bit once you're older. In
Mm.
infancy, the microbiome that's set in those first, couple of years of life are very influenced heavily by mom's gut microbiome and vaginal microbiome, which is why,
Mm.
if you're pregnant, or even before conception, I would love moms and dads to all optimize their microbiomes, even dads, because dad's
Mm.
microbiome has also been associated with pregnancy outcomes and birth outcomes.
Mm.
So
Right.
before you try to get pregnant, why not optimize everything so you have the best chance at the healthiest baby possible? And then
Right.
while you're pregnant, for mamas to do a gut and a vaginal microbiome test, because that really influences your baby's microbiome from birth. Also, depending on how the baby's born, whether cesarean or breastfed or formula fed, there's different factors. But now, as an older kid or a teenager, there's so many other influences that have
Yeah,
shifted
right.
the microbiome.
Yeah.
So we often do share, though, if there's some not such good bacteria or yeast or parasites in our gut, as a family we do often share those.
Yeah.
Our family's microbiomes are more similar than people outside of our families, just because we're drinking from the same cup and we're sharing food and all of that. And so um
Yeah.
so you so when I see like abnormal microorganisms, very often they're shared, but then the rest can be varied. And so, it can be helpful. And in fact, I just ordered, they're sitting in my garage waiting until after spring break to to do, but tiny health testing for me and my husband and my two kids, because it's been a long time since we've done one, and why not? I mean, why not?
Yeah.
It's time to fine tune. So
Knowledge is power, right? And
yes,
also
yes.
I think what you're speaking to, you get the status, get a sense of where you're what you're dealing with, and also continue the three F's, right? Continue to eat your fibers and your phyto
Phytonutrients and fermented foods.
nutrients and your
Yeah.
fermented, as well as getting rid of all those significant factors. And then supplement wise, do you have, if somebody were to say, where do I start? There's so many supplements out there. Some of our kids are reluctant to take them. Sort of where do you begin if you
Yeah, I mean, there's not, I would say most kids do need an extra vitamin D supplement. Most kids will need an extra omega-3, fish oil supplement.
Mhm.
Those just tend to be very common nutritional deficiencies in our children.
Yeah.
Even if they're spending all day outside in the summer, I mean, even then, when I measure children's vitamin D levels, the vast majority of kids are low or insufficient, right? Not at
Mhm.
optimal levels. Um, so those are kind of the foundations, the D, the omega-3. I also find that many kids need a little extra zinc. But
Yeah.
if you're just kind of, thinking, okay, what supplements should I start with? I would start with vitamin D and fish oils, because there even is some evidence that vitamin D and fish oils have some prebiotic benefits, right? That
Yeah.
they have some benefits to support a healthy microbiome. Prebiotics are the foods that feed the probiotics. Okay, so
Mm.
and then start with those, and then start slowly working on the diet, which whatever area you can, right? Sometimes the first step that's easier is just to make swaps in what packaged foods you're buying. Just becoming really savvy, and instead of buying,
Yeah.
the this kind of potato chips, you buy that kind of potato chips that doesn't have, the artificial color in it, or swapping out your yogurt, or, just really, really looking, even foods that look healthy on the front of the cover, you have to look at the
Mhm.
label. Because that
Yeah.
front of the cover doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah.
That front of the cover is just to get our eyes on the package. And then the real information is on the back.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, there's little things we can do. I shouldn't be so hard on myself. So hip peas, the chickpea
Hip
chips.
peas, yeah, the chickpea chips. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, so we were driving, she grabbed the whole bag, she was hungry. We were in the car and I said, "Can you read me the ingredients on the back?" And she did, and everything she could pronounce. So I thought, "Great," and I know that I had looked, but I just want to make
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, but so great. Thank you so much for your time. You shared so much. So what would you say is the one thing? What have you seen is the thing that makes the biggest difference in a child's but gut biome? If someone to walk away, oh my goodness, so much information. Where do we start?
Yeah. I would say, the place to start is really with their food, but let's make it really simple. The first
Mm,
step is just to read the labels and get out any artificial colors, and really work on keeping the added sugars down, right?
yeah.
Making those swaps, because the like if you just get the added sugars down and get out all the artificial dyes, you will
Mm,
see improvements. And it's hard to know, is their gut microbiome really improving? But you'll see improvements in their mood, and you'll see
yeah.
improvements in their skin, and you'll see improvements in other areas. In fact, I had a mom with a kiddo with, really, pretty bad eczema, write to me and say, she all she did was follow, the steps in the book, you know, clean up the diet, add some things, take away some things, work on the mindfulness, and within 2 months, her daughter's skin was almost clear. And it was
I love that.
before, I mean, it was just lathering on, the moisturizers, and trying to, sparingly use the steroids, which she, really was reluctant to do, but there was
Mm,
nothing else that was helpful. And so again, these simple things can make really profound differences. But I would say, yeah,
mm.
starting with, I think the biggest needle mover that you will notice a difference is, cutting down the sugars and getting rid of the dyes.
Yeah, I love it. And you share another story in the book about a young boy who had big behaviors, and after
Yes.
2 weeks, right, he was kissing his mom or hugging her and,
So different. Yes. I mean,
just from the
he was,
artificial colors. Yeah,
yeah.
crazy how quickly. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Dr. Lisa. I so appreciate you. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with our community. There's so much we can do. Feel really helpless, but there is so much we can do. Thank you for
There
making
is.
it so accessible and easy for us to do.
Oh, you're welcome.